Welcome back. Britain now has the world's biggest civilian stockpile of the nuclear waste product plutonium in the world. Some see it as a liability, but could it be the solution to our energy needs? The government was expected to announce its plans for the stockpile last month, but Channel 4 News understands the decision has now been postponed to the next Parliament. So what can be done with our plutonium, and should we be completely rethinking the future of nuclear? We'll be debating that in a moment. First, our science editor Tom Clarke has been given exclusive access to Sellafield's plutonium research.
The pools look almost inviting, but a dip would be a bad idea. Nearly all of Britain's nuclear waste comes here to Sellafield in Cumbria, and it's now home to the world's largest civilian stockpile of one of the most controversial elements known to man, plutonium. This is what's feeding Britain's growing plutonium stockpile. I'm standing at Sellafield's Thorpe reprocessing plant. Annually, it takes in 180 tonnes of spent nuclear fuel, some of which is being stored in this inlet pond beneath my feet. And it's then reprocessed. And that produces between 4 and 6 tonnes of brand new plutonium every year. The element behind mankind's most ghastly creation is now stored here in quantities that could make thousands of nuclear bombs. Such is the security around plutonium, we weren't allowed anywhere near the stockpile itself. But Channel 4 News was the first to be allowed to film in this laboratory at Sellafield, dedicated to looking after the stuff. What are some of the key things you're trying to work on?
We're looking at the fundamental science, so we're looking at the long-term behaviour of plutonium, both in terms of surface science and bulk chemistry.
Instead of remaining an expensive and toxic liability, this innocuous-looking plutonium oxide powder could be the solution to our energy needs.
The preferred option is to reuse the material for power generation. And there are two reasons for that. One's to extract the energy value from the material, and the other is it then makes it spent fuel, and spent fuel is something that we know how to manage.
This is as close as you or I are ever going to get to Britain's increasingly large stockpile of plutonium. Because it's a highly radiotoxic metal, it can only be handled in these shielded glove boxes. And what scientists here are trying to do is find new ways of storing plutonium more safely long term, but also to turn it into a fuel for the future. A decision from the government about what to do with the plutonium was expected this autumn, but Channel 4 News understands that action has been delayed, possibly until the next Parliament, and that could have serious implications for our energy future. Some people believe the safest thing to do with plutonium is put it well beyond reach.
While it's waiting to be treated as fuel, it's still in a dangerous condition, okay? And we've had this sitting around here for years and years and years, you know? Thank goodness nothing's happened yet.
But there is a growing consensus our environment's future may depend on nuclear power.
When I realised quite how serious climate change was, and I did that through writing and researching on the science of that, I realised that we needed to get the figures that would add up, and that means having really enormous amounts of carbon neutral electricity deployed globally. And you can't do that just with wind and solar, but you can do it if you have nuclear in the mix as well.
Mark Lynas is one of a number of environmentalists behind a new film opening in the UK this week.
As a lifelong environmentalist, I'm against nuclear. But what if what I've been thinking all this time and what my friends have been thinking all this time is wrong?
It calls for a renaissance of the atomic power they once reviled.
Fourth-generation reactors.
New, smaller, safer reactors can now treat the nuclear waste we've got as fuel rather than a liability.
We've got enough spent nuclear fuel sitting around on the surface now in the UK to run the whole country at current power demand for 500 years.
It's costing the taxpayer tens of millions of pounds a year just to keep the plutonium we have safe. But building a new fleet of reactors isn't straightforward either.
You have to consider there's the question of cost, there's the question of the energy value, there's the questions of how palatable nuclear power is to whoever you're talking to on the subject. And of course plutonium itself, people have opinions about it. It's an element, one of the elements on the periodic table with a personality, and people have strong views about whether they like it or not.
So it's perhaps not surprising the government is balking at the prospect of tackling the plutonium problem. But the longer no decision is made, the longer the plutonium sits at Sellafield, doing nothing very expensively. And we do urgently need new low-carbon sources of energy.